Hello everyone, welcome to the garage, and this is going to be obviously the second part to my previous video. In this video I'm going to be talking about phrases that are commonly used, and before I get to that, I failed to uh, talk about a couple of components, so sorry to throw more at you guys, but the components that I am talking about are going to be bearings and gaskets. Bearings, as you can obviously see in the photos, they are about um, basically metallic or plastic or hard rubber parts that stand between two metal surfaces, and they basically help two metallic components, usually parts that are rotating, parts that are sliding, or parts that are um, twisting, have a twisting, rotating, motion. They usually help that, work without actually scraping the two parts together and pretty much having the two different metals or the two metal parts chew each other out and um, pretty much wear each other out and kind of eat each other. The most casual way that I can explain this is a screwdriver and a screw or nut that is the Phillips head. Um, Obviously, you can see that here. Um, and it gets it chews up, it scrapes up, it messes up that little cross uh, part on the screw. That's the most simplest and most common way to look at it. A bearing prevents that from happening. That is why there's a little hack that sometimes when you're having a little trouble with, a really tight screw or really tight bolt, that's a Phillips head, by the way, that's that little cross. Put a rubber band or put some kind of rubber part, and you can actually typically just twist it off. It doesn't always work. I've you know experienced that firsthand, but that's kind of the gist. Um, that is what a bearing is. Now, like I said before, bearings come in all different shapes and sizes. Um, Sometimes they're a softer piece of metal in between two much tougher, more, um, much more stronger pieces of metal. That it would be in the case in crankshafts. Crankshafts don't just plop into the block. They actually have bearings. We call them bearings, but obviously they're just half moon uh, little shaped pieces of metal, but they're a softer metal. Um, on top of that, usually there's oil there, which may have been a chemical I missed in the previous video. Once again, I'm covering things that I missed in the previous video. I apologize for that. But moving on, the other component is gaskets. Obviously, gaskets are made of rubber, cork, or depending on what kind of gasket we're talking about, they can also sometimes be just metal. For example, head gaskets. Head gaskets are something I did not talk about. Head gaskets go between the cylinder head and the block. They are basically making the gap between those two metallic parts airtight. No air can escape, no air can go in or out. To that extent, the block has several holes in it that allows coolant or water. In some areas, they just straight up use water inside the motor. Um, and it has specific passages that the water goes through. Well, guess what? They're watertight as well. The cylinder head and the block have to be airtight and watertight. Um, that is how you get catastrophic failures as well. Kind of circling back to a video ago, sometimes catastrophic failures take that form. These gasket, the cylinder head gasket, will fail. It will fail, and that watertight, airtight seal, that non-existent gap is gone, and therefore water, oil, or air, all three of them sometimes will mix. Um, like I said, circling back to that video, that's where we get catastrophic failures as well. One big thing I forgot to mention. Now, setting that aside, gaskets, as I was talking about, just a few moments ago, um, they come in different shapes, sizes, and out of different things. Like I said, plastic. More commonly, they tend to be out of plastic and rubber these days. Back in the olden days, and I'm not even actually talking about that long ago, 90s, 1980s, 1970s, 1960s, they were sometimes made out of cork. Um, cork like you know, like things out of wine and champagne bottles. That same material was used on your car. Um, but as technology has improved and as materials have changed, uh, they found ways to make it more out of rubber, and leading to the current day, some of them are made out of plastic, a soft or sometimes hard plastic. You know, just shows that with a little bit of ingenuity, you can kind of make it out of anything. Um, but yes, I totally forgot to mention those two parts in my previous video. I'm taking 7 minutes here. I'm seeing that to explain all this. But as I mentioned at the end of the last video, this kind of information can take months, sometimes even weeks to months to sometimes even years to learn. So just kind of shotgun shooting this information at you guys. I'm gonna miss some things. Um, I'm gonna miss things. I'm gonna fail to mention others, and that's just kind of how it goes. This is information that takes, like I said, up to years to learn. So if I miss a thing or two, please forgive me. um, I'm doing what I can. I'm doing the best I can to explain it, to really get to all the, down to the little detail stuff. But, you know, something's gotta slip through the cracks. But with that said, um, and without further ado, I will get to the point of this video, which is phrases. Phrases that mechanics or mechanically inclined individuals, or, just individuals in general who know about auto mechanics use. And some of these are very common, some of them are not. It kind of, your mileage will vary on that, um, depending on how much knowledge you have and how much knowledge people around you have. Uh, Definitely some of these are common, but, you know, I'm sure with the with the advent of online computerized technology, some of these are slowly kind of, you know people are missing out on some of these. But nonetheless, uh, moving forward, revving, the most basic one. Revving is the action of uh, basically accelerating or pressing the gas pedal, um, you know kind of pressing it harder. Thus, you actually hear the engine actually, um, you know, kind of accelerate, and basically with that, it's a bit hard to explain, even though it's actually something simple. Um, and actually, this involves a part I missed now that I think about it, uh, which is throttle body. I just recalled that throttle body is another part I forgot to mention, and it ties into what I'm about to talk about. The throttle body is basically a circular, flat piece of steel that controls how much air goes in and out of the engine, or not in and out, because no engine should have air coming out through the throttle body, but how much it sucks in. Um, Kind of like a vacuum. Think of it as putting your hand over the vacuum hose, and all of a sudden it, starts making that crazy sound. Something is similar to that. Car engines can do something akin to that. What it is on there is it twists actually. It doesn't actually kind of move in and out of the way. It twists, and when it's completely flat, it's blocking about usually 90% of the air, which is when you just turn the car on and you're just kind of sitting there. You're not moving, you're not doing anything, you're not pressing the gas. It's just, going to be doing that. Um, as you slowly press the gas pedal, because most people obviously know the gas pedal. If you drive, you kind of know that. As you do that, in the olden days, there was literally a wire slowly pulling on it. And this does exist even on the old cars, carbureted cars and stuff like that. It existed. Um, and obviously, throttle bodies are newer cars, which, from pulling from the last video, it's where they had the electronic and the mechanical fuel injection. That's when the throttle body kind of comes in. Um, so, like I said, it's basically a circular kind of plate that slowly twists, and it gradually lets more air in to the engine. With more air, the fuel injection system can inject more fuel. With more fuel, guess what? Things can work faster, and that's why on the gauge you'll see that 1 to usually 7 or to 9, depending on what kind of car you have. It'll usually have a 1 through 7 little counter, little little gauge that'll kind of slowly move up, or if you press it really hard, and really fast, it'll suddenly just sweep all the way to one side, from the 1 all the way to the 4, and it'll stay there and stuff like that. That's the act of revving an engine. Once again, because in the old days there used to be a cable, or a physical rod, a literal stick, a metallic stick that you could tug on, even though you aren't seated inside the car. You could, do it from from where the engine is at. You could tug on that little guy, and, you would hear the engine, you know, pick up RPMs and stuff like that. And there's many ways of saying that. Revving is just the most common. Another, a kind of slang way of saying that is obviously floor it, or, the phrase pedal to the metal. That's where it comes from. Uh, Give me a sec. Oh yeah, of course, foot to the floor. Duh. That, once again, it's talking about that. Um, and the last one, wide open throttle. That's, once again, all those mean the exact same thing, which is, pressing the gas pedal as hard as you can, or pressing it hard really fast. Um, Now getting into more technical terms, um, is valve float. Um, Valve float, as I kind of explained a little bit in the previous video when I mentioned valves and the cylinder head, valve float is a very specific thing of, the engine is working so hard and so fast. You have your foot, down all the way, um, and you're revving it so hard that it mechanically starts to kind of, lose its rhythm. Parts within the engine start losing their rhythm, and, when you say valve float, you actually mean a specific set of parts, basically the valves. That's why it's in the wording. Um, valve float is basically that happens when the valve goes down or basically opens to let either the air in or let the hot gases out of the combustion chamber. And the spring that's supposed to push it back up, to pull it back up, is not strong enough. Basically, the motion of actually pushing it down was so intense, so strong that the spring is not strong enough to pull it back up. And that is dangerous because sometimes the engines are designed to specifically work in a specific time. And if they don't, well, the piston comes up before the valve has gone up as well, and they end up bumping into each other. Now, um, we say bumping into each other, but really it's like it's like holding a hammer and then having someone else hit that hammer with a sledgehammer. It's going to hurt. It's not going to be pretty, and there's going to be a lot of pain. Um, you know, things couldn't even break. That's why valve float is very bad. In newer cars, it's it's still just as bad, but um, automakers have kind of learned to use computers to stop you from doing that. Um, they have done it by limiting how much gas, how much high amount of gas can go in, um, and basically use the computer and the different sensors to stop you from reaching that point. They'll, while they're testing stuff for the car or while they're testing a new engine for a car, they'll find that limit and be like, oh, it happens here, you know, say at, when the little gauge read, that shows you how fast the engine's working, say it happens at around 7, at the 7 mark. Well, they'll be like, okay, so we'll stop an engine at around 6.5. At 6.5, the computer is going to say no more. Um, and they do that to stop you from reaching 7 and breaking stuff. Um, so, you know, they've done that. Um, so that's valve float. Um, spun a bearing. Spun a bearing is a phrase that I actually, that's kind of why I mentioned bearings at the beginning. And that is because what that means is one of the bearings actually, typically when that's said, they're referring to the crankshaft and the connecting rods, because the connecting rods kind of bolt around the crankshaft. They use the bearings that I talked about, and because once again those parts you know are on there, they can twist their you know out of their place, and when that happens, uh, then we start getting metal to metal contact and stuff like that. That basically means that the space between the crankshaft and the connecting rod is big enough for that metal in between that's supposed to be kind of um, it's kind of supposed to take up that space, is no longer doing it. It's either too thin or the gap between them is too big and it's allowed to just spin freely in there. And in that case, in the case of a crankshaft and a connecting rod, that's not good. They're designed to kind of be between them, but where you put it is where you put it, and it's not supposed to twist out of its out of its place. If it does, once again, we get metal to metal, and then you end up seeing glittery parts in your oil, and that's never good because that means stuff has gone wrong inside the engine, and you're gonna need a new engine. Uh, So that's why I mentioned both bearing at the beginning of the video, and that's what spun a bearing. Now, this isn't, spinning a bearing isn't exclusive to the crankshaft. It mostly happens there, but not exclusive. That can also happen in camshafts, because camshafts, when wherever they're at, whether they're inside the block or they're on top of the cylinder heads, they're going to be metal to metal otherwise. So they also take bearings, and those can also move out of their place. They can also twist in their place, and like I just said, that's not good. So that can happen too. Um, Out of timing. I believe I briefly mentioned this in the previous video, but once again, uh, that refers to, the distributor, of course. Um, Also, it can happen with more modern cars, um, but usually it's an old car kind of thing, and that, as I said before, it has to do with the spark plugs not going off when they're supposed to. And that can be traced all the way back to the distributor, because the distributor wasn't put in the right spot. It wasn't mechanically tied to the rest of the motor at the right spot, so it's out of timing, meaning it's not in sync with everything else. It's kind of off doing what it's supposed to be doing, but on its own time, and that's usually not good. um, there's various ways that it can be off of time, out of timing, or off of timing, but yeah, basically it's supposed to be working with the rest of the engine, but it's not. It is, but it's doing it at the wrong time, and so that. Um, to go back a bit, next one is rod knock. Rod knock is um, the connecting rod, aka the rod, uh, knocking, and that can also happen when you spun a bearing. Typically, that's how you find out. That's basically an audio cue that, hey, something's not right. Rod knock, usually that's when the gap that I was talking about is too big, and therefore it's kind of shaking in place, kind of moving side to side, up or down, even though it's still, you know, even though it's still hugging, it's still bolted and around the crankshaft, it's kind of hugging it, but once again, the gap between the crankshaft and the connecting rod is too big, so it kind of has this little knock, as this, it makes a little sound, and it's pretty uh, pretty noticeable. Um, a lot of people either don't care, or they don't notice it, but it sounds like two um, metal parts just kind of clanging, clanging, but it's not a high pitched. It's actually a pretty low pitched, sound. Um, but yes, that is the term for that, rod knock. If someone tells you, hey, that sounds like rod knock, uh, that usually means you need to buy a new engine, or you have to pay a mechanic a lot of money to buy new parts and maybe restore the engine. It Once again, it mileage varies on that. Different mechanics will say no, just buy a whole new engine. Others would be like, no, I can probably fix everything for a lot cheaper. It kind of goes from mechanic to mechanic, um, and from shop to shop. It's whatever they decide to do. But uh, that is another one. Um, Tied to that, if the previous problem continues on for too long, you get piston slap. Piston slap refers to the piston literally smacking the sides of the block. Um, the hole that it goes into on the block, it'll actually start kind of smacking around, from side to side, and you will, once again, you'll be able to hear it, just like with rod knock. You'll kind of be able to hear that. Um, it's an audible, clank, but um, it's not a high pitched, not a high pitched sound. It's a very, thunk thunk kind of sound. And yeah, you hear a car doing that, just driving on the street. You hear a car, kind of clanging, but kind of a deep sounded clanging. Usually they got a problem, something like that. You know, they'll have, that's usually what it is, and you'd be surprised how often you can hear that. Um, the next term is going to be blown up. Um, when your buddy says, "Oh man, I blew up the motor," or this or that, it just means kind of what I said in the catastrophic failure video. Just that the engine suffered catastrophic failure in one way or another. Um, Sometimes when you're not so mechanically inclined, you can just say that to say it just stopped working. um, you don't know why, so you just call it, I blew it up, you know, or oh, he blew it up. And then it's like, well, what happened? I don't know. And it's like, you know, that's kind of the giveaway right there. They don't know. They just know that it just stopped working. So, um, let's see. The last few terms, fried the blank blank. Um, this one specifies to smaller pieces in the engine. When someone says fried or grilled or burnt, um, usually it means that it was heated up to a point where it just stopped doing its job. Usually it'll be springs, or at least a type of spring, which are the piston rings. That's what I'm talking about. They basically act as a kind of, you know, gasket or a type of spring around the piston to stop, air or oil, kind of going from one side to the other on the piston, usually from the bottom of the piston to the top or the top to the bottom, you know. Um, when they say fried or grilled or burned, um, usually they were heated up to a point where they just stop working. They stop doing whatever they were meant to do. Typically, the piston rings, as I just said, what will happen to those is that either they'll do one of two things. They'll either um, close up, basically shrink per se, to the point that they don't seal anymore, assuming that they have enough space to do that, um, or um, they heat it up to a point where they just broke. They heated up to a point where they filled up all the gap, all the space that they have, and then kept going. So usually that means stuff breaks. Uh, Typically it's the piston that'll break. In the case of piston rings, that usually means that the piston ring broke off part of the piston because you know, they basically kind of heated up to the point that they started getting bigger and they got too big and they just broke something else. Um, and the last term is snapped the, blank blank, um, or, snapped. That's kind of self-explanatory, basically something breaks, just straight up breaks. Um, Connecting rods can just break. Either they're working so fast or there's, in the case of supercharged or turbocharged cars, um, they're having to, be pushed down so hard and then have to push back up, that the metal is just fails. It just gives up and it just breaks. Um, Now, like I said, a couple of different parts can do that. That's, one of the big ones. Connecting rods, valves, they can also just break. They can just break off. Um, in that case, a whole bunch of other things can happen. One part can break and it could be a domino effect and just start breaking parts after parts after parts until the motor just stops working. In which case, once again, you could use the term, oh, it blew up. Uh, but yes, snapped the connecting rod, it snapped the valve because once again, the valve has a small little stick-like section to it, so it can just break right there. It's rare, it's unusual, but it can happen, especially if the metal's weak enough or it's thin enough. It can definitely happen. Um, Older engines that use rocker arms, push rods, and stuff like that, they can just snap. The bolts, the actual bolts that are used to, bolts and screws that are used to put everything together, sometimes they can just snap. They can just break. You know, the especially um, if you start using them for things they're not intended to or in ways they're not intended to, parts can just start breaking. That is why, circling back to the previous video, they try to use so many different types of metals. And, when you start buying parts, specific parts, um, to make your car more sporty and try to make it, especially in engine parts I'm talking about. When you start buying, uh, parts from companies, they'll be like, oh, well, what kind of, this or that are you using? And if, sometimes they need to know that because they're like, oh, hey, ours is made out of this metal, that part is made out of this other metal. Uh, you can't use them together because this metal will, eventually break that other. This part will break that part. A quick example that I recall of something like that is apparently distributors, little, the little gear that they use to know what the rest of the engine is doing or when it should fire different spark plugs. Um, that matters. Um, you know that matters because if one metal is tougher than the other, something's gonna break, and whichever one can't handle the stress or can't handle the forces, whether it be the twisting or the rubbing or whatever, whoever whoever's the weaker one, they're the ones that are going to give. And sometimes it could be the wrong part. You think, oh, it's this part, and then you actually start taking things apart and you see, actually it wasn't that part, it was this other part, and I didn't buy that and I didn't prepare for that. Oh no, I'm in trouble. um, that's what it is. And that is all I've got. Um, I can see that this recording is about half an hour. I'm sorry that these videos are so long, but they are because this stuff, like I said earlier, it's stuff that takes years. At times, usually takes months. That's why college courses that teach this stuff or technical school courses usually last a couple of months because it's gonna take you some time to really get the grasp of these things. And so for me to try to explain it in a quick 10-20 minute video is very, very difficult. Um, um, you know, hopefully, hopefully there are many of you who are hearing this. Uh, if you are, thank you for sticking around for so long, hearing me blab on for almost, half an hour or a little over half an hour. But with that, the next video is probably going to be actually breaking down and taking a bit of a deep dive into the different proposed systems that I kind of, the different categories that I put together on the cars. I'm still working on that. I haven't forgotten about it. It's just, actually, trying to get as much information about these cars and about all that kind of stuff is a little here and there. And I am active on, um, as you can see, I am playing Fallout 76. I am an active player there. Um, I'm on PC, if anyone is wondering. Um, or in case you couldn't tell, I am on PC, so um, you know, the 76 with its game loop, and obviously kind of draws me in, and especially with the ending of the um, previous season of the gold paint schemes and all that stuff. You know, that really drew me in, and that really kind of held me hostage to an extent. Trying to get as much of that stuff, and definitely this new season that has already started for about a little, I want to say it's been about less than a week or so. It's there are definitely prizes in there that I definitely want. The power armor, in case you couldn't tell from the video, the power armor paint schemes are definitely something I want. So I'm gonna be logging in and checking in with that as often as I can. Um, so thank you all for listening. Seriously, if you liked any of this stuff, please like, comment, subscribe. All the typical YouTube things. Share this video. Um, if you wanna if you wanna throw some of your friends or uh, acquaintances or whatever for a loop with some shotgun facts about car stuff, go ahead, share this video, share the previous video. um, so thank you all so much for watching and listening to me ramble on, um, and I will see everyone in the next video.